Welcome to our study of Journey Without Goal, the Tantric Wisdom of the Buddha by Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And as my teachers would always encourage, as I should say, our teachers would always encourage to generate a recognition of the value of what we're doing right from the start. So we're not here just to investigate or celebrate or indulge in our particular little delighting in the Buddha's teaching, but rather we're seeing this as part of the greater solution in terms of the suffering that we have in the universe. We can very easily trace the cause of suffering universally down to a place of self-centering. And of course, very often in the general conversation, when we talk about self-centering, we might think of it as sort of something that's morally despicable, and we shouldn't be self-centered. And that, of course, also can inform you could say, renunciation of self-centering. But the Buddha's point with regards to self-centering is that it's ultimately delusional. There is no self. This self comes about due to our lack of actually looking at reality. And what we have in the Buddhist teaching is an unveiling of reality on the basis of the Buddha's investigation, looking at the nature of reality and discovering its, well, it's a little bit problematic to say its true nature, because that might lead us to think that there's some sort of philosophical belief system. But what actually the Buddha did with his enlightenment was that he stopped ignoring the nature of reality. He looked, and when we in Buddhism speak about vipassana, we're not talking about introducing some new belief or some Buddhist perspective. It's simply just having a look if this well, you know, the classical example is if you have the perception that you're walking along this path and you see a snake, and as you look, then you see, oh, there actually wasn't a snake. There's just a piece of rope that looks like a snake. We had a moment of assuming that things were something they're not, and that is essentially what samsara is. It's the place of an assumption about a reality that doesn't exist. So in the study of the Dharma, we're looking at what is. It's a greater science that goes beyond just the science of studying objective phenomena, but actually also looking at reality, particularly in terms of the perspective of where we're coming from, this subject, and clarifying this ignorance, this condition of almost proactively ignoring reality. We discover a condition of clarity that's innate to our subjectivity, and that's not a truth that's particularly philosophical. It's an experience that's free of the ordinary assumptions and also the ordinary insecurity and delusional, afflicted, you could say, toxic conditions of the mind that centers around itself. And so relinquishing that, we're beginning to see clearer. So the practice of Dharma, in the sense of seeing clearer, enables us to gain a wider perspective that's free of all the mishaps and confused actions that come from our confusion. And so the scope of what we're doing here really has this universal value. I was just speaking with a friend of mine whose daughter is in 3-year retreat yesterday, and the difference between the value systems that we have in Buddhism and the modern world are obvious in this situation where the mother is missing her daughter in 3-year retreat. And yet, obviously, from the Buddhist perspective, what she's doing is something wonderful. And of course, the mother also respects this. But you know, if your child is attending a course at MIT, there's a tremendous respect for that, or UTS, or some university, you know. Whereas in the modern world, unfortunately, we have a confined science that doesn't quite recognize the value of what the Buddhist teaching is about, which is understanding a greater reality beyond just what we can look at, stuff, and so forth. So that's where presently our study in Journey Without Goal is very much about discovering this nature of reality. Last time we were looking at, the last paragraph actually we left off at was about this ambiguity that comes about, that we have a strange reality that appears and yet it's not graspable. And there were a few questions about this. So I'm going to start actually just going over that last paragraph about ambiguity again. And here we have Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche. Around that time, I think these teachings were given. And by the way, I've put the link for the link that takes you to the Chronicles website, where to the place where you have Trungpa Rinpoche's teachings on Journey Without Goal. So you actually have the master himself teaching it there in a video recording, warmly recommended. So it's sitting in a PDF, but it's in the PDF there's an active link that takes you to that website. Okay. Trungpa Rinpoche skillfully actually introduces tantric methodology here with the discussion of the seed syllable. In tantric methodology, seed syllable is essentially our DNA. This is where we originated from. The seed syllable is what manifests on the basis of wisdom and compassion. And you could say our case history as a person in the tantric perspective is that our ground initially is pure, and within that there manifests a spontaneous quality of warmth that extends outward and which manifests. And it's there from this place then we as a being, we begin to, you could say, to have an awareness of the other, an awareness of space and so forth. And from the samsaric place, this becomes the self-centered consciousness. That's the self-centered consciousness that takes rebirth. But from a tantric perspective, this purity that we have is never lost. And so the manifestation that takes place is then seen in terms of a seed syllable. So in that experience of our being, we then, from the tantric perspective, we exist as a manifestation of wisdom and compassion that manifests. And this experience of our being comes with, then, from our perspective, a certain degree of ambiguity. Of course, from the tantric perspective, it's the nature of reality. But from our ordinary confused perspective, this fact that there is nothing that we can actually grasp, and that goes both with the subjective dimension of who we are. There's nothing about ourselves we can actually ultimately grasp, and also with regards to the phenomenal world, there's nothing that we can grasp. And this paradox that there is something and yet there's nothing to be grasped, this is also what Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, he makes a point of in one of his teachings. He says, if you're going to study Buddhism, you better get used to paradox. You better get used to the phenomenon that things are paradoxical. And Trungpa Rinpoche here in the preceding discussion speaks about a sense of humor in terms of relating to that. But then the question is, what do we actually do? And that's where the tantric people, sorry. The tantric people are actually at ease with this, but they operate from the point of view of how things actually are, rather than how we might project onto them. And the way that things actually are, this what we call the unity of appearance and emptiness, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, etc., means that phenomena, they are actually accepted for what they are. And in this way, it's not really a question of a paradox as such. And taking this unity of how things are, taking the unity of how things appear, and yet have nothing about them that can be grasped, is not seen as a problem. And that's where essentially we are from the very start of Vajrayana. We're operating with the great vision that we have in the Prajnaparamita teaching, is that there's nothing that can be grasped. But that does not mean that phenomena don't manifest. And this is here where Trungpa discusses then this nature of there's a continuity of non-existence. And yet that non-existence doesn't mean that there's nothing there. See, also the problem with materialist science and objectivist science is that we're assuming there is something there. And we're trying to understand that something. But as long as we're operating with a notion of a something, this is where we fail. And that's, of course, what the middle way teaching, the Prajnaparamita teachings, the Heart Sutra, all the teachings of wisdom are trying to let us know. Just like somebody was sitting with somebody in a cinema, also quoting Tsongsa Rinpoche, we're sitting with somebody in a cinema who completely, or we are completely taken by the movie, and we think it's so real. And the Buddha nudges us and saying, it's just a movie, chill out, it's okay. And so with all the wisdom teachings, we're being told that phenomena don't have an existence, and yet we're sort of baffled. We're thinking, hey, but there's something there. And that's where the fact that things don't exist doesn't constitute some problem about that there wouldn't be perception, there wouldn't be appearance. It's just that they're not solid. Anyway, I'm going on a little bit, but just as sort of a little bit of a precursor to what Trungpa speaks about here, because it's an important point. Really, the thing about what we could call non-existence, that in no way stands in opposition to manifestation, is a really important point. This is this point also that's made in the Heart Sutra. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is no other than emptiness, emptiness is no other than form, and so on. This is such an important point. So I'm just going to read through the paragraph that we ended on last time, and it says, at this point we could finally start to relate with the ambiguity. In the tantric tradition, discovering that ambiguity is called discovering the seed syllable. Ambiguity is called a seed syllable when it becomes a starting point rather than a source of problems. When we accept uncertainty as the working base, then we begin to discover that we do not exist. We can experience and appreciate the ambiguity as a source of confusion as well as a source of humor. The discovery of non-existence comes from experiencing both the energy of humor and the heaviness of thingness or form of confusion. But form or thingness does not prove the existence of energy, and energy does not prove the existence of form. So there is no confirmation, just ambiguity. Therefore, we find ourselves at a loss. However, at this point, that feeling of being lost has the quality of freedom rather than the quality of confusion. This is an important point. And what Trungpa Rinpoche notes, that what Trungpa Rinpoche speaks about here, and of course referring to tantric language of the seed symbol, which is more the sense of our existence is not a problem. It's rather something that is marvelous. It's the place where we begin to manifest enlightenment from the tantric point of view. And taking uncertainty as the working base is again this familiar theme within the methodology of practice, that we're familiarizing ourselves with lack of ground. You know, the famous quote we have from Trungpa Rinpoche that occurs on Facebook every few weeks, you know, where Trungpa Rinpoche's joke about the pilot who says, I have bad news and good news. The bad news is that we're falling. The good news is that there's no ground. That is, of course, what we cultivate within the practice of meditation, that we're comfortable with that. We're comfortable with that. We don't need to secure ourselves. We don't need to buy into the poverty of our fixation and our ego, and so and in that sense, there is both an experience of our energy, our existence, and also the fact that we can't hold on to it. There's no confirmation. So, ambiguity. But that's a good starting point. And this is an invitation into a wider landscape. This is then what we're going to be speaking about here. Okay? Oh, thank you. Gosh, there's somebody who's really with the program. I should start with the calling the Lama from afar. Okay, I should have done that. Thank you for reminding me. Gosh, what a terrible lecturer you have here. Look, I'm going to find some time here at the end. Now we're a little bit on a roll with this particular theme, but we'll then end with invoking the Lama from afar, crying to the gurus from afar. We'll be doing that, so we won't miss that part. Apologies for that. Yeah, I was just going over this sort of, having done a little bit of homework about this. So I was thinking about this before the class started. So apologies. Thank you very much for notifying me on this. Anyway, okay. Ambiguity, our personal experience. This experience of ambiguity is a personal experience rather than an analytical experience. We begin to realize that we actually do not exist. We do not exist because of our existence. That is the punchline of our ambiguity. And the world exists because of our non-existence. We do not exist, therefore the world exists. Now, what do we mean with that? Huh? Well, the thing is, if we look at any given phenomenon, any given reality, we won't be able to find anything that actually is the world. We won't find anything that is us. There's a continual non-existence taking place, and yet that is continually giving rise to or allowing for manifestation. So I'm looking at the sofa in front of me, and there's nothing in the sofa itself that from its own side says sofa. And yet that space in which this sofa can manifest, which is me labeling this phenomena as a sofa, that space in no way is limited to being a nothing. And so that nothing allows for the unfolding and continually unceasing manifestation. And sometimes in tantric liturgies, we'll refer to this quality as the nirmanakaya, the unobstructed nirmanakaya that's always manifesting, but it's in no way different from the dhammakaya quality of that there's nothing that can be grasped. So what Trungpa is talking about here is what we, in a classical context, you could say a much in some ways slightly within the scientific vernacular of Buddhism, we say form is emptiness, emptiness is form. We say the unity of appearance and emptiness and so on. Trungpa here is sort of taking this into the realm of, you could almost say, a more poetic, intuitive interpretation or presentation. A little bit teasing us, right? He's saying these things that are rather sort of impenetrable or sort of ambiguous, paradoxical. So we do not exist because of our existence. The very fact that we can move from A to B is only because that we're not stuck in existing. If we were existing in the way that we, in our ignorance, label ourselves and our phenomena as solid, we'd be stuck forever in one place. It's thanks to non-existence, it's thanks to emptiness that we can exist, that we can move. Like Nagarjuna, he will say, for those who understand emptiness, everything is possible. And what we mean with that is that in that phenomena don't have anything solid about them. They don't exist in any way that can be objectified, and yet anything manifests within that. We're simply just talking about also dependent arising, that phenomena exist on the basis of conditions. They don't exist as hard and fast phenomena from their own side. So we should think about this when we're sort of upset with people or situations and so on. And that's where it always, the discovery of dependent arising or emptiness means that we're never stuck with one particular situation. Phenomena will be continually moving with the interaction of our engagement and their, you could say, the way that phenomena are. We could say that their non-existence means that they can always change into something else. This is an important point, so I hope you're forgiving me for being rather insistent that we nail this one. It's an important point, and because it is so sort of paradoxical, we might just say, okay, and move on. But it's actually a very important point for us to approach. Approach the scope of the Buddhist teaching, what we're doing, what it is we're trying to understand, and particularly if we're going to engage in Vajrayana, where we're actually making this vision our basis, then it's essential. We do not exist, therefore the world exists. If we did exist, we'd be stuck. There would be no world. So thanks to the flexible, fluid, conditioned nature of our reality, which is what spells out non-existence, it moves, it flows, it manifests. Trungpa Rinpoche continues, there is an enormous joke behind the whole thing, a big joke. We might ask, who is playing such a joke on us? It is difficult to say. We do not know who it is at all. We are so uncertain that we might not even have a question mark to put at the end of our sentence. Nevertheless, that is our purpose in studying Tantra, to find out who is the questioner, to set this question up altogether, if anyone at all. So this is the not putting the question mark is that we might just accept this as something inexplicable. And we have that a lot in common discourse, even where we say, oh, we will, these kind of popular scientific sort of shows where you sort of have people saying, well, we will probably never understand this, or we'll never understand that, and or the sort of introductions to philosophical work, humans have always pondered, etc., etc. And the pondering, of course, is fine, but very often there is also an implicit acceptance that we can't understand these things. And no, when it comes to certain things, the tantric people are onto it, the Buddha is onto it. There's something that needs to be, that can be known, and it needs to be known. Trungpa Rinpoche then says, the beginner's point of view is to realize non-existence, to understand non-existence, and to experience non-existence. It is very important for us to realize that sight, smell, colors, emotion, formlessness, and form are all expressions of no beginning, non-existence, egolessness. So let's just hone in on this. This refers to the practice of meditation, where we familiarize ourselves with the groundlessness, and actually this opens up for a wider experience. And this is also what we have, what is clearly then stated in the Heart Sutra that many of us regularly chant. So it's this unity of something we know this from our exposure to the Buddhist practice of meditation, and also from the teachings on wisdom, such as the Heart Sutra. Trungpa Rinpoche says, such non-existence has to be experienced personally rather than analytically or philosophically. That personal experience is extremely important. In order for us to get into Tantra properly, in order to become good Tantra students, we have to go through the experience of non-existence, however frustrating, confusing, or irritating it may seem. Otherwise, what we're doing is completely fruitless. And those of us who are familiar with tantric literature, and let it be known, as it's being said here, we begin actually with then the understanding of this non-existence. Whenever you do tantric practice, you start off with Om Mahashunyata Janabhasra or whatever, Om Subhava Shuddha Sarvadharma, etc. You actually clean up the confused projections, and you settle into groundlessness. And it's from there that the vision of purity originates. We're never ever in Tantra, with all the visualization and the sacred culture, we're never ever imposing some sort of nice rosy vision of how reality is. We are introducing a clean slate. We're introducing a vision of phenomena without our projections onto them. And that that is coming from this recognition of non-existence, that the confused projections that we ordinarily struggle with or operate from are actually unfounded. And that's where we introduce this non-existence. Of course, we're going to introduce, to some extent, we are introducing a greater vision that comes with manifestation, but it doesn't exist. Those manifestations don't exist on the premise that we're ordinarily operating from and which ordinarily drive our suffering. And unless we have that down, then the tantric vehicle might be very interesting, but it also might bring about some unwanted results. It could very well be something that further builds up our ignorance. Vajra nature. Okay, let's see here. Look, I'm going to be a good boy and stick to not taking questions until the end, but then again, since we are on a particular theme, I just might take some questions now before we begin the next chapter. About the sofa analogy. So does this mean we give rise to the phenomenal world with our minds? Yes, we do. That's an important point. We're not saying that, we're not sort of falling into what we would call the solipsistic extreme of thinking there's nothing but me and my mind, but we're recognizing that the way that we relate to the phenomenal world goes through a mind where we very often operate with confused projections, and that's what we're clearing up. Is it true that nearly all of us are guilty of various degrees of self-interest in samsara, which is a mug's game? Well, we're not so much guilty as we're just confused. We're just held by confusion. So in that sense, we are creating our samsara. I'm not exactly familiar with the expression a mug's game, but I would say more than being guilty, we're all innocent. So all sentient beings are innocent. That's an important point, but we are held by confusion. So can one say that emptiness is like a potentiality? Yeah, people who love quantum physics and so on, they love sort of the idea of emptiness as potentiality and possibility and that sort of thing. I suppose so. We can, as sort of a working title, I guess we can. That's okay to work with it. I remember Trungpa Rinpoche once said, as much as we talk about emptiness, we might as well be talking about fullness. It's only from the point of view of our grasping that we need to be told things are empty. If we had complete nihilistic saying that there's nothing, which is also very, there's, what is it again? I think it's, forget who it is. Is it Leibniz or one of the Western philosophers who says it's extraordinary that we talk about something because there's much more nothing than actually something, right? So if we were to just hold on to something, then we need to be introduced to phenomena as fullness rather than emptiness. So we're really trying to, with emptiness, extract us from a sort of projection and assumption. But yeah, potentiality, sure. Ambiguity is called discovering seed symbol. This means that the seed symbol is only a language symbol, right? Yes, it's something that is basic to our perception of phenomena. From the tantric perspective, it's the pure resonating of reality. From a sentient being's point of view, it becomes the foundation for co-emergent ignorance, co-emergent labeling, and you could say the whole dualistic setup. So seed symbol sits right at the cusp of where samsara and nirvana, they sort of separate. So ambiguity is confusion because of the seed symbol is the starting point of manifestation. So the seed symbol is only a presentation of symbols. Yes, anything can be seed symbol, and the seed symbol can be everything. Just to make sure I understand correctly. It's always a little bit problematic with how we are reading into these things, and I would suggest to return to what Trungpa Rinpoche is saying and understand it in the broader context of what he's trying to put across. It's difficult to consolidate an understanding quickly around this. So, so I would say the point really that's being made here is very much linked up to where we begin to manifest, which in the samsaric condition is that we try confusedly to hold on to phenomena, and in the you could say the tantric or the enlightened phenomena, we're manifesting out of wisdom and compassion. So seed syllable is not necessarily only seen in terms of symbolism. It's also about you could say dependent arising and how things manifest. It's actually quite a science in terms of the Vajrayana, the science around the syllables. So I'd like to suggest we leave this one quite open because it has a lot of further implications. But anyway, the bottom line in terms of what Trungpa Rinpoche would like us to do is really to familiarize ourselves with the groundlessness that we cultivate, the experience of which we cultivate through meditation, and then also an understanding that we then with which we then approach the Vajrayana practice, which is more sort of analytical. On a somewhat side note, is there a difference between Vajrayana and Tantra? It's very much the same thing, but different words. The scope, the Tantra is the theme of Vajrayana. So Tantra in that sense is the Buddha nature, the continuity that we're talking about here, that is this paradox of existence and non-existence, or the non-existence, the continuity of non-existence that gives rise to phenomena, that we refer to as the continuity of Tantra. And then also sometimes you come across Tantra as being as a category of literature, which are then the tantric texts. Does phenomena exist because there is an observer? Well, that's what we often in Western philosophy, we refer to that as sort of the solipsistic trap, because that's where we might think that if I'm not here, then, you know, if does a tree falling in a forest without an observer actually make a noise? That sort of philosophical notion, we're not really in any way going beyond what we can immediately experience. And we certainly experience phenomena on the basis of being observers. We can't assume that phenomena only exist because of the observer, but we can identify in a very real way that the way that we perceive phenomena are based on our observation. So we have a woman that's being seen by her daughter and also by her partner, her father. And so the father will see this woman as daughter. The daughter will see the woman as mother. And so the phenomenon in itself is constructed on the basis of the observer. So this we have a lot of also. That we give rise to phenomena through our mind, on the one hand, and that phenomena arises due to its own causes and conditions on the other, seems not to be the same. Have I misunderstood? Well, we could say that phenomena exists out there, but there's nothing about them that has any objectifiable quality whatsoever. And the way that we construct phenomena is on the basis of our particular process of labeling. So in the case of a Buddha, then all the space of phenomena is seen as what we call the display of wisdoms and kayas. In the case of a sentient being, we experience kleshas and karma. So that we give rise to phenomena through on one hand, and that phenomena arises. Yeah, no, the way that phenomena exists, essentially, as far as we're concerned, is due to our particular way of projecting onto phenomena. Okay. Could you please guide us through one more time on the statement, we do not exist, therefore the world exists? Yeah, what we have as a world that we perceive is a web of causes and conditions, a web of dependent arising. And this web of arising would not exist if it was solid. So if it was solid, we would be stuck in we'd be frozen. If we really truly existed, we'd be stuck, in one particular way, because we would be this person that we assume that we are right now. And the object that we're perceiving would truly exist as how it was. And that means it would never change. The object would never change. We would never change. We wouldn't have a world. Our world is defined by actually being a continual, and then quote quantum physics, if you like, a continual, you could say, field of possibility and becoming. This is actually also the Tibetan word for samsara, sipa, which is the continual process of becoming. So the world as a process of becoming would not exist if we were stuck in just not unchanging. And this also, of course, refers to the nature of being in and of itself, because that's also not something that in any way can be objectified or you could say stuck in being in one way or another. So but also it's good when we have something that sort of bugs us. That's a great line to carry with us as something that will bug us. We do not exist, therefore the world exists. Tantra is the verb, the practice of to tantra. No, tantra is a noun in the sense of it's both it's the practice of Vajrayana. Yeah, it's a noun. Okay. All right. So, sorry, I deviated from my policy here. That happens. We will now continue. Chapter 2, Vajra Nature. The Vajrayana seems to have been widely misunderstood in the West. People have projected a lot of ideas onto it, believing it to be an expression of wildness and freedom. However, the cultivation of Vajrayana has to be based on a very subtle, definite, ordinary, and real foundation. Otherwise, we are lost. Not only we are lost, but we are destroying ourselves. So here, Trungpa Rinpoche is talking about what I think many of us are familiar with, is sort of the idea of Tantra workshops as sort of ways to enhance the bliss of your sex life, or Tantra is just letting it all hang out. And a very, very surprisingly common thing that we find sometimes is that, well, it's all just the wisdom, isn't it? I mean, what can we say? What is, we can't really say what's going to bring enlightenment, what's not going to bring enlightenment. Isn't everything just naturally perfect? And that's so profoundly confused. There is exactly what Trungpa says, a very subtle and definite real foundation. So we need to be clear on what we're doing. So Tantra is not sort of just a sort of a vague, hazy, lovely, blissful, free-for-all, anything goes sort of like way of grooving along, but it's a very clear knowledge of the vision here is a very clear knowledge of the purity and the innate goodness that is basic to ourselves, to reality. But that understanding that everything has this core of purity does not deny that temporarily sentient beings are lost within some dense veils of confusion that cause suffering. And this we need to extract ourselves from. So as much as we're introducing a tantric perspective, we need to also understand what is the object that needs to be purified through the method of Tantra. What is the illness that we're here to remedy? So we need to have a clear understanding, like Trungpa just say, otherwise we're lost. Not only are we lost, but we're destroying ourselves. We're wasting our time. Trungpa says, in talking about the tantric tradition, we're not talking about playing with sex or aggression or colors or the phenomenal world. At this point, we're simply developing a basic understanding of how Tantra works. We have to be very conservative. We have to be very, very concerned with the fundamentals. I could say, don't worry. If you worry, that's your problem. If you don't worry, everything is going to be okay. Let's dance together. Let's play music together. Let's drink milk and honey. But that does not work, not at all. Talking about Tantra is not such an easy matter. So this is one of these things we sort of want to write down in gold calligraphy as a starting point, really, of this discussion. We shouldn't be gullible or simple-minded about this. Trungpa says, working with the energy of Vajrayana is like dealing with a live electric wire. We can use switches, gloves, and all sorts of buffers in handling this live wire, but we also have the choice of using our bare hands and touching the live wire directly, in which case we are in trouble. The institution of Tantra, not only Buddhist Tantra but Hindu Tantra as well, has been presented very generously to American students by many competent and great teachers. Still, many teachers get into trouble. They can't take it. They simply can't take it. They end up destroying themselves. They end up playing with the energy until it becomes a spiritual atomic bomb. And of course, we could see this in terms of engaging with practices like Kundalini yoga and the sort of the practices that you have in terms of the skillful means of Tantra. It might be visualization, it might be mantra, it might be yoga practices of various kinds, it might be some of the practices you come across in the context of Hatha yoga or whatever. But all of this, in some way, could just lead to a tremendous waste of time. It could also result in a tremendously inflated ego and conjuring up or cultivating or becoming the foundation for entire cultures of delusion. And that's where it could be very, very destructive. Trungpa says, we might feel that working with Tantra is like planting a little seed. We nourish it, make it germinate, and send out shoots of greenery until finally it will blossom as a beautiful flower. That is wishful thinking. We cannot approach Tantra in that way. Instead, we have to realize that taking care of such a plant is not ordinary gardening. An extraordinary process is needed. Dealing with our state of being, our state of mind, is extraordinary in many ways. Moreover, dealing with our state of mind from the subtle tantric point of view is extremely dangerous, and equally highly productive. Therefore, we should be very careful and open when we talk about Vajrayana. Non-existence is the only preparation for Tantra, and we should realize that there is no substitute. So in approaching Vajrayana, we have to have a theoretical and also a practical foundation. Trungpa himself put his students through years of preparation before he actually taught them Tantra. What the present discussion here is sort of a little bit sort of like somebody out on the street, sort of in front of a restaurant, waving the menu card and saying, you know, there's good food to be had in there, you know, and we're not actually ordering the food, we're not actually eating the food, but we're hearing about it, and it might sound good. But in terms of the actual preparation and the actual foundation for Tantra, Trungpa put his students through years of sitting practice, being willing to acknowledge and humbly work with their neurosis and make that the foundation, a very real foundation, putting them through a lot of teaching. His students, Trungpa taught a lot, and his students studied a lot. And so there was a very good and firm foundation of theory and practice before then students would begin to engage with, let's say, the preliminary practices of Tantra and Nindra. But once they were ready for that, I remember over in my camp, which was, you know, much more the Tibetan mob, and sort of didn't with the around Dinghu Rinpoche and so forth. You know, we just we heard of what was happening with Trungpa students, and we were just amazed, because I remember there was the director of his external affairs that came to see Rinpoche and you know, lovely chap. And he was telling us about there at that point, actually, there was already something like 900 people that had completed their Nundro in a very short time, really, from they started to they completed, and very much because they had this solid foundation. They had to a large extent knew what they were doing, and also to a large extent very much motivated. So in that sense, the preparation is important. What the preparation, in one line that we're talking about here, in terms of, it's defined in terms of non-existence as the only preparation for Tantra, that cannot be substituted. With that, then we're meaning this groundlessness, this openness, this vipassana, this discipline that is founded on lifestyle, practice of meditation, study, reflecting, and all taking place within a very open and sophisticated atmosphere. Then a vision of non-existence that sort of substitutes the ordinary delusional assumption of reality, and that is linked up with an actual practice of groundlessness through meditation, or not only groundlessness, but we could say greater openness through meditation. Absolutely essential. So difficult for us to just, oh yeah, I like Vajrayana, I wanna find out what that is. And then we go on YouTube, then we go all over the internet, and on the internet there's very little sane stuff about Vajrayana. If we're beginning to use Google and the internet as our source of understanding Vajrayana, we're gonna be thoroughly confused. So that's why it's lucky that someone like Trungpa Rinpoche and also other masters have been as generous as they have in actually explaining the teaching properly from a perspective of a tradition that knows Vajrayana, not just is in love with Vajrayana, I think it's groovy and far out and wants to sort of make their own interpretations of it, but actually coming from a genuine, insightful place. Trungpa Rinpoche then says, the experience of non-existence brings a sense of delightful humor and at the same time complete openness and freedom. In addition, it brings an experience of complete indestructibility that is unchallengeable, immovable, and completely solid. The experience of indestructibility can only occur when we realize that non-existence is possible, in the sense of being without reference point, without philosophical definitions, even without the notion of non-existence. This is what we call establishing the view. And again, in my own camp of, you could say, more traditional Tibetan Buddhism, we call this establishing the view with certainty. And that is what we call also the middle way, Madhyamika. In the context of students approaching the teaching and approaching the view and the study of Madhyamika, there unfortunately still is a little bit of an explanatory gap taking place, where students very often emerge from Madhyamika teachings rather baffled with being hit with the references to the way that the sort of the delusional ways that, or the sort of the flawed ways, the flawed sciences that attempt to understand reality in terms of philosophical definitions, that attempt to understand reality in terms of pigeonholing phenomena in a way that they sort of can be objectified. And that's where Madhyamika teaching very often can be almost more confusing than helpful, because it operates with definitions that are linked up with an Indian discourse. And of course, the Tibetans were custodians of this with the deepest respect for the Indian traditions. They upheld the discussions of the old India, and actually as such upheld really you could say a dialectic tradition of engaging in inquiry and challenging logically and so forth. So that's enormously valuable, and actually it can be very valuable for us who live in a modern multicultural context. But the the introduction to non-existence as we have it in the teachings of the Prajnaparamita, of Madhyamaka and so forth, very often can be very dense in terms of the way that they're presented. And that's where students, unfortunately, very often, rather than having sort of things clearing up on the basis of the teachings of Madhyamaka, very often there's a struggle taking place. And so that's where there has to be a certain stubbornness and also patience with regards to arriving at this. We don't just understand the middle way teachings right away. We don't just understand Madhyamaka and what Trungpa here is referring to as non-existence just like that. It needs to come with a continual exposure to the practice of meditation and also the understanding of the logic and the theory with it. So that's an indispensable prerequisite really for approaching the path, and particularly then Vajrayana. The development of indestructibility or immovability is extremely important to understand. Such indestructibility can only come out of a state of nothingness, egolessness, or non-existence. According to the Buddha, Tantra is greater liberation, greater discipline, and greater vision. But this greater liberation is based on working with the potentialities and energies that exist within us. Therefore, without having some understanding of non-existence, there's no point in discussing indestructibility. So again, with the understanding of non-existence, with the understanding of egolessness and all of that, making that the foundation for our path, then we engage with Tantra. Tantra begins, you could say, where we ordinarily in the general Buddhist vehicle, just sort of we arrive at what we would call the freedom from conceptual constructs, the Dharma Dhatu, emptiness, and so forth. And that's sort of left as being, yes, that's the ultimate statement about reality. Yes, that's true. But in the case of the Vajrayana, that's actually the beginning point. And so that's where then, with that foundation, then there's a practice of integrating all our perceptions, all our existence, like Trungpa says, the potentialities and energies that exist within us. But engaging with the energies and potentialities within us without an understanding of non-existence, then it becomes a confused enterprise. So again, and even recently, Tongsa Khyentse Rinpoche was teaching in some context referring to the path, and also emphasizing how important it is that we understand Madhyamaka, we understand emptiness, that we have a view. We operate within a culture that is very much submissive to and deeply in awe of science. And we should understand that the science we're talking about here, even though it talks about what is intangible, the mind, is equally founded on the same, what we could call epistemic premises. It's based on what is verifiable, but it's verifiable from the point of view of our experience. So it's not dreaming up a nice metaphysical sort of, or operating with a metaphysical assumption or some belief system. It's about really working with our own experience and an analysis, a clear, hard, intelligent analysis about our condition. Okay. Okay. Some of you have asked some really good questions here. Would you kindly shed some light on what is the fundamental difference between Indian Tantra and Buddhist Tantra? It's a big one. Not even sure. I'd have to know more about Indian Tantra, I think. Can you talk a bit about what the traditional process was or is of teachers giving these teachings? Are there certain criteria before giving these teachings? There are, yes. A teacher needs to be essentially not only learned but also accomplished. Yeah. Does emptiness mean that matter does not actually exist? Well, here we are using the word non-existence, and they certainly do. Emptiness means that matter don't exist the way that we think it exists. But we're introducing something beyond what we call existence and non-existence. non-existence is again just the Buddha nudging us and saying, hey, it's just a movie. But of course, there is still the movie, right? So it's in a way just introducing a wider perspective. Okay. I'll now go to just invoking. This is also what's so wonderful in what we're doing here, is that we're invoking a living tradition of actual experience. So we're not just working with philosophy, we're operating with a deep, humble recognition of the enormity of the value of the realization of those who went before us. Guru Yeshe Tsogyal, think of me. Look upon me from the celestial realm, the city of great bliss. Help us who commit evil deeds to cross the ocean of samsara to the great city of liberation. So we invoke Yeshe Tsogyal. Let me just see what the footnotes have. Guru Yeshe Tsogyal. Guru Yeshe Tsogyal is one of the two chief consorts of Padmakara, Padmasambhava, the other being Mandarama. She is author of the biography of Padmasambhava, Dhammatangi. Yes, but Yeshe Tsogyal, who is also very often portrayed as a manifestation of, Vajrayana, Tara, etc., and as such, seen as someone whose birth was entirely intentional as a great bodhisattva, also was the main student of Guru Padmasambhava. So the Nyingma tradition really refers to Yeshe Tsogyal sort of as the mother of the entire Tibetan Buddhism, really, but also as the quintessential perfect student. Like in the Kagyu tradition, we talk about Milarepa as being the perfect, committed, diligent student. Yeshe Tsogyal similarly, and also Yeshe Tsogyal was the recipient of Padmasambhava's teachings in the sense that she upheld the lineage and taught this, and was very much involved with also the whole treasure tradition of concealing the teachings of Padmasambhava for future times. But we invoke Yeshe Tsogyal not just as a historical figure, but also as the nature of wisdom that abides innately, and as such, on the basis of the recollection or thinking of Yeshe Tsogyal, we invoke her from the intangible realm that goes beyond time and space, which is then the celestial realm, the city of great bliss. And this is then something that is not seen in terms of past, in terms of historicity and so forth. This is the unconditional nature of reality. So again, we're talking about Yeshe Tsogyal merely as a mirror of that which goes beyond time and space. But we're invoking then Yeshe Tsogyal, help us who commit evil deeds to cross the ocean of samsara. So again, we commit evil deeds, but we're not guilty as such. We're innocently, in our confusion, committing deeds that create our own suffering. So that's why they're evil. And we are then invoking the presence of the heart of liberation in the form of Yeshe Tsogyal as a means then to cross through this confusion, cross to the great city of liberation. So we'll continue there next time. I'll make sure that, there you go, shan't forget. There was one question about Hindu Tantra and so on, which of course I just sort of said I'm not really qualified. Let's just be clear that actually in the old days in India, the Buddhists and the Indian Tantrikas, there's one thing they have in common, and certainly, or rather I should say, in Buddhism, there's, as part of the tantric vows, actually you vow never to disparage paths or religions or any sacred practices. So Tantrika would be perfectly at home in a church or in a mosque or anywhere that celebrates the sacred. And as such, then also the Indian and Buddhist yogis in the old India, they very much shared the same shrines. They would do different things. They had different sadhanas, but there was very much common ground and a lot of respect between them. Of course, sometimes there were some discussions around the view that were different, and that's where I'm a little bit cautious about saying anything. When you talk about, for example, Advaita Vedanta, it sounds very similar to what we talk about in both the teachings on Buddha nature and also Madhyamika. The Buddhists would probably say that in the Buddhist teaching, the non-existence is an important point, and that in the Hindu Tantra, then there is still a reference point. Of course, this reference point is then a reference point of focusing on non-existence also. But the Buddhists then would say, well, there's the nature of complete non-grasping, the great middle way and so forth, has no reference point whatsoever. And as long as we have reference point, then we still, there's this, the cause of suffering is still there. And then they would say this is where Indian and Buddhist Tantra differ. But of course, we could just leave it quite simply and say, you know, if there is reference point, then, you know, regardless of what you call yourself, you're going to wander in samsara. If you have no reference point, then regardless what you call yourself, you'd be free. So that's the Buddhist perspective. Also, sometimes in the Indian tradition, you talk about persons going into samadhi, like mahasamadhi. A great sage would go into mahasamadhi, and that's also where the Buddhists would say going into a samadhi is not going to be liberation. So there's a bit of squabbling taking place, but I also would stand by my initial statement that I don't know enough about Indian Tantra and the debate between the two to be able to properly discuss it. There's a famous line, actually, a little anecdote from when Atisha was in Tibet. And at one point he heard that the great master Mitripa had passed away. And he cried. And someone says, why are you crying? And he says, in India, until now, there's only been two persons who could really differentiate between the Indian teachings and the Buddhist teachings. And one was myself and the other was Mitripa. So clearly to make the distinction between these two is quite a large topic. Yeah. Okay. Then here we're going a little bit over time. If you need to go, please feel free. I'm just going to take one or two more. I'm just going to take the questions here. Dear Jakob, I'm sorry, but this is off topic. But just for your information, that I sent an email to you regarding the pure appearance registration. Okay, I'll have a look at that. Yeah. With pure appearance, if you have received Vajrayana empowerment, you'll be fine. So no need to worry. Thank you for reminding us we have to be patient with studying the middle way. Yes, and please do study the middle way, because it's like anything, you know, when you begin to familiarize yourself with the language, you find an enormous wealth of insight. Then there is, I feel in awe. This topic is so raw, so to the point. It's like, do you really want to know how things really are? Okay, here you have it. Can we even digest it? You can digest it. And this is the stuff, this is where Buddhism, you could say, is very encouraging, and it doesn't harp on any kind of, it doesn't exploit some naive idea that you're going to study Buddhism, you become a Buddhist and everything's just going to be fine. No, it's like studying medicine or anything. You're going to have to look into it. You can't say, well, I believe in this particular brand of medicine and everything's hunky-dory. Well, that's great, but, you know, learn it. And that's where the work of Buddhism requires that we engage in both the analysis and in the actual application. Thank you for presenting it. We will have to do prayers of aspiration to be able to chew these unique teachings. Yes, we do prayers, certainly. Like Tongse once said, you know, we're not going to be able to understand this purely by our intellectual muscle. We need to also create the conditions of merit, both in terms of wisdom and also in terms of, you could say, the accumulation of virtue and so forth, the relative, both according to relative and absolute truth. Yes, Advaita Vedanta is what comes to mind, yes. Tathagata is a reference point though. That could be a bit ambiguous. No, Tathagata, interestingly enough, is the non-existence. That is the heart of reality. So that's again a paradox possibly. But yes, no, Tathagata is sometimes constructed as some sort of a relative truth, but certainly the general acknowledgement is that, of course, when we're talking about Buddha nature, we are basing it on the Madhyamika, or that it's based on the understanding of emptiness. It is the realization of emptiness, if you like. Did you say that Mahasamadhi is not liberation? Yes, we would say that any samadhi naturally has a reference point. It's a dwelling. At the same time, also, yes, we understand samadhi in the sense of deepening our experience of reality, but the notion of dwelling is problematic. Of course, if Mahasamadhi means that you're abiding free from any conceptual construct, then okay, that should be good enough. Thank you for this recharging class. Okay, you're very welcome. And thank you. You're welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you very much. It's very generous thank yous here. So I think time for dedication, but thank you very much. It's great. Yeah, so we did do the Lama, calling the Lama from afar. Yeah, we did Yeshut Chögyam. Okay. Okay, good. 10:08, time for dedication. Through this virtue, may all beings throughout existence awaken together without a single being left behind. The pure realm of the luminous essence, the ground of the great perfection, may they remain inseparable from the kayas and wisdoms. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we are born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Thank you.